Hi guys, and welcome to Bedtime Stories from History. Tonight you find yourself standing beneath a sky that seems to have forgotten how to stop raining. The frontier settlement around you is a world of wooden cabins, muddy paths, flickering lanterns, and endless grey clouds hanging low over the open land. Water drips from rooftops, puddles swallow wagon tracks, and every step you take sinks slightly into the softened earth. You can smell wet timber, damp wool, smoke from struggling fireplaces, and the rich scent of soil drinking in more rain than anyone expected. And here is the uncomfortable little truth. You probably won't survive this kind of frontier weather very comfortably. Because modern conveniences have spoiled you more than you realize. No heated rooms, no instant deliveries, no weather app politely warning you that your shoes are about to become small swimming pools. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle in, tell me where you are listening from and what time it is where you live. It is always fascinating to imagine these stories travelling across the world, reaching quiet bedrooms, cosy chairs, and peaceful corners far away from the muddy trails of the 19th century. Now, dim the lights. You step carefully onto the wooden walkway outside a small frontier town, watching the rain fall in steady sheets. The storm has been here for days, and nobody knows exactly when it will leave. The people around you have stopped asking whether tomorrow will be dry. Instead, they ask whether the roof will hold, whether the animals have enough feed, and whether the road into town will become usable again. This is the Old West that rarely appears in paintings. It's not only endless sunshine, dramatic sunsets, and riders crossing golden plains. It is also waiting. It is patience. It is listening to rain tapping against a roof while wondering how many more mornings will begin with the same sound. Life on the frontier depends heavily on the weather, before modern roads, reliable transportation systems, and advanced forecasting. A long period of rain could transform a small inconvenience into a serious challenge. A road that looked perfectly normal one afternoon could become a river of mud by the next morning. A short trip to a nearby settlement could suddenly become impossible. A farmer could look across a field and wonder whether the season that promised hope might instead bring disappointment. A mainstream historical fact is that many Western settlements grew along rivers and transportation routes because access to water and trade was essential. Yet those same locations could become vulnerable when heavy rains caused flooding or damaged travel paths. Settlers needed water for daily life, but too much water could threaten homes, crops, and movement. You walk through the settlement and notice how quickly people adjust. The blacksmith shop still glows with a small fire, though the air inside is thick with dampness. The sound of hammer striking metal continues because tools still need repairing. A wagon wheel cracked during a muddy journey cannot simply wait for better weather. A broken hinge on a cabin door still needs attention. The frontier does not completely stop when the sky opens. Inside a small general store, you find people gathered closer than usual. They're not only shopping, they're sharing information. Someone mentions that a trail farther north has become difficult to cross. Another person talks about a family whose livestock shelter needs repairs. In a world without instant communication, a store becomes a place where news travels slowly from one person to another. The rain changes social life in subtle ways. Neighbours who might normally spend their days scattered across farms and ranches suddenly find themselves indoors, speaking more often. A storm that isolates people physically can sometimes bring them together emotionally. You hear stories repeated around fireplaces, memories of previous storms, and predictions about when the clouds might finally break apart. There is even a little humour in these difficult moments. A quirky frontier belief tells us that some people watched animals closely for signs of changing weather, believing certain behaviours could predict storms before they arrived. A restless horse, unusual bird activity, or changes in insects were sometimes treated as natural warnings. Whether these observations contained genuine wisdom or simply reflected human curiosity, they reveal how closely people paid attention to the world around them. You begin to understand that endless rain was not only a weather event, it was a test of adaptation. Every object in a frontier home had a purpose. A blanket was not merely a blanket, it was warmth during a cold night when wet clothing refused to dry. A pile of firewood was not just fuel, it was security. A small supply of food was not simply storage. It was the difference between comfort and anxiety when roads disappeared. Historians still argue whether certain accounts of unusually long rainy periods in frontier diaries describe rare climate events or simply the personal memory of people who experienced difficult seasons. Human memory has a way of making hardship feel larger, especially when a storm interrupts the normal rhythm of life. A week of rain can feel like a month when every morning begins with the same dark clouds. As you move through the settlement, you notice the small details. Water collects along the edges of wooden buildings, boots sit near doorways, covered in mud, coats hang from hooks, slowly releasing moisture into the air. Children watch streams form beside the road, finding small moments of entertainment in a situation that adults view with concern. The frontier is full of contradictions. It is a place of independence, but also dependence. People often imagine settlers as completely self-sufficient, standing alone against nature. In reality, survival frequently depended on cooperation. A neighbour with extra supplies, a skilled carpenter, a person who understood animals, or simply someone willing to share a warm meal could make a difficult season easier. The rain continues through the evening. Lanterns glow behind cabin windows, creating small islands of warmth in a landscape of grey water and dark earth. The town grows quieter as people settle indoors. Outside, the storm keeps tapping its gentle rhythm against wood and glass. You sit near the warmth of a fire and listen. There is no rush. There is nowhere else to be. The frontier, for a little while, has slowed itself down, and tomorrow, when the rain arrives again, everyone will wake up and continue doing what people have always done. They will adapt. They will wait. They will find a way to continue. The rain has not disappeared overnight. When you open your eyes in the early morning darkness, the first thing you notice is the sound. Before the rooster calls, before footsteps cross the floorboards, before anyone speaks, there is the steady rhythm of water falling from the sky. It taps against the roof above you like countless tiny fingers, reminding everyone in the settlement that the storm still controls the day. You sit up beneath a heavy blanket and feel the cool air touching your face. The cabin around you is simple, built from logs fitted together with careful hands. The walls are strong, but they are not perfect. Small gaps between the timber allow whispers of cold air to enter. Smoke from the fireplace curls upward, carrying the scent of burning wood mixed with the damp smell of rain-soaked clothing. This is the ordinary home of many frontier families. It is not large, and it is not filled with possessions. Every object has earned its place. A wooden table becomes a place for eating, repairing tools, preparing food, and teaching children. A chair may be used for resting in the evening, mending clothing, or holding a basket of supplies. In a small cabin, nothing is wasted because space itself is precious. You look toward the corner where boots and coats have been placed near the fire. They are never completely dry during weeks of rain. Someone wakes early to turn them, move them closer to warmth, and make sure they are ready for another day outside. Imagine that simple routine repeated again and again, not dramatic, not heroic, just the quiet work required to keep life moving. A mainstream historical fact is that many pioneer homes on the American frontier were constructed from locally available materials such as logs, sod, or simple wooden boards depending on the region. These homes reflected practical needs rather than comfort. They were designed to protect families from wind, cold, heat, and storms, but they still required constant care. You step closer to the fireplace, where a pot hangs above the flames. Breakfast is already being prepared, the smell of warm grain, coffee, and whatever supplies remain fills the room. Food during difficult weather is planned carefully. A family cannot simply walk into town whenever they wish. A flooded road can turn a short journey into an exhausting adventure. The pantry becomes a place of quiet calculation. How much flour remains? How much dried meat is left? Are there enough vegetables stored from the previous season? These questions are not asked with panic every morning, but they are always somewhere in the background. The adults understand something that children often do not. A rainy day is not only about being uncomfortable, it is about uncertainty. A few days of rain may be pleasant, a week may be frustrating. Several weeks may affect everything from transportation to farming to trade. Inside the cabin, however, life continues. Children find ways to occupy themselves. They play with simple wooden toys, listen to conversations, help with small tasks, and watch the world outside change. The window becomes their connection to the stormy landscape. They see birds searching for shelter, animals moving carefully through mud, and neighbours passing by with their heads lowered against the rain. There is something strangely peaceful about this slower rhythm. Modern people often dream of escaping busy schedules and constant notifications. Yet the frontier version of slowing down comes with a few inconveniences. There is no comfortable blanket delivery arriving at your door. There is no button to press for entertainment. If you become bored, you must create your own amusement. You might read an old book by candlelight. You might repair something that has been waiting for attention. You might sit with family members and hear stories that have been repeated so many times everyone knows the ending. These moments create memories not because they are extraordinary, but because they are shared. A quirky tidbit from frontier life is that some settlers kept newspapers for much longer than we might expect. Not only for reading, but also because paper had many practical uses. Old newspapers could help insulate small spaces, wrap objects, start fires, or serve as a useful household material. In a world where supplies were limited, almost everything could find a second purpose. The rain outside continues its endless performance. The roof creaks occasionally as water collects and slides away. Someone checks for leaks, someone adjusts the fire, someone sweeps away mud brought inside from earlier trips outdoors. These small actions are repeated across thousands of homes scattered across the frontier. Historians still debate whether frontier families experienced long, rainy periods primarily as moments of hardship, or whether some communities adapted so well that these seasons became simply another part of rural life. The answer likely depends on where people lived, what resources they had, and how connected they were to neighbours. A family living near a busy settlement with nearby supplies might remember a rainy season as inconvenient. A family isolated many miles from others might remember the same weather as a serious challenge. The storm itself was the same, but the experience of the storm was shaped by circumstance. As afternoon arrives, the cabin grows warmer, the fire glows softly. Outside, the landscape has become a world of reflections. Puddles mirror the grey sky. Fence posts stand dark against the wet ground. The familiar path leading away from the cabin has almost disappeared beneath the mud. You notice something important about these homes. They are not simply shelters, they are small worlds. Within these walls, people celebrate, argue, rest, work, and dream. The cabin protects them from the storm, but it also becomes the place where family identity is created. During weeks of endless rain, the frontier home transforms. It becomes a workshop, classroom, kitchen, gathering place, and refuge. The outside world may feel distant, but inside there is still movement and purpose. As evening approaches, you hear another sound beneath the rain. It is laughter. Someone tells a story. Someone makes a joke about the weather. Someone complains that the sun has probably forgotten the town exists, and for a moment, the storm feels a little smaller. The rain is still falling, the roads are still muddy. Tomorrow may bring another grey morning, but tonight, inside this wooden cabin, there is warmth, there is food, there is companionship, and there is the quiet confidence that people have carried through countless difficult seasons before. By the third or fourth week of constant rain, you begin to understand that the true power of the storm is not only in the water falling from the clouds, it is in the way the rain changes distance. Places that once felt close suddenly feel impossibly far away. A neighbouring farm that sits only a few miles down the trail may as well be on another continent, when the road between you becomes a deep stretch of mud and standing water. You step outside your cabin and look toward the trail that leads into town. Yesterday, wagons passed here. Riders carried messages here. Children walked along this path. Now the ground has become a messy mixture of soft earth, puddles, and deep tracks carved by wheels and hooves. Every movement leaves evidence behind. The road remembers every person who attempts to cross it. You carefully place one boot forward. It sinks slightly. You pull it free with effort, feeling the mud hold on for just a moment longer than you would like. This is the daily reality of frontier travel during prolonged rain. The land itself seems to ask a question before allowing anyone to continue. Are you certain you need to go for many settlers? The answer had to be yes. A farmer still needed supplies, a merchant still needed customers, a doctor still needed to reach patients, a letter still needed to travel. Life could slow down, but it could not completely stop. A mainstream historical fact is that before the expansion of railroads, many Western communities depended heavily on wagon routes, horseback travel, and stagecoach lines for transportation and communication. These systems connected isolated settlements, but they were extremely vulnerable to poor weather. A storm could delay deliveries, damage roads, and make travel dangerous even without any dramatic disaster. You watch a wagon approach from a distance. The driver sits forward, shoulders wrapped against the rain, guiding the animals carefully. The wheels are covered with thick mud. Every rotation requires more effort than usual. The passengers inside remain quiet, knowing that unnecessary movement only makes the journey harder. The old romantic image of a wagon crossing the frontier often shows adventure under bright skies. The reality is slower and less glamorous. It is patience. It is repairing equipment. It is waiting beside a trail while the weather decides your schedule. The people who travelled these roads developed a special relationship with uncertainty. They learned that plans were flexible. A journey expected to take 1 day might take 3. A visit might be postponed. A shipment might arrive late. The frontier rewarded those who could adjust without losing hope. Mail riders face particular challenges. A letter from a distant family member could carry enormous emotional value, especially for settlers living far from their original homes. Yet the person carrying that letter had to deal with the same flooded crossings and damaged trails as everyone else. You imagine a rider moving through the rain, protecting the mail as carefully as possible. The saddle is wet, the clothing is heavy, the horse moves slowly through difficult ground. The rider is not only carrying paper, they are carrying news, memories, and connections between people separated by great distances. There is a small irony here. Today, waiting a few minutes for a message can feel frustrating. On the frontier, waiting several weeks was completely normal. A delayed letter was not a minor inconvenience. It was simply part of life. A quirky tidbit from transportation history is that some travellers carried extra pieces of equipment specifically because muddy conditions could create unexpected problems. Simple items like ropes, spare parts, and tools could make the difference between continuing a journey and becoming stuck. A person who travelled without preparation quickly learned that the frontier was not impressed by confidence alone. You follow the trail farther and notice how communities respond. When someone becomes stuck, others often help. A neighbor brings stronger animals, someone offers tools, another person provides shelter while waiting for conditions to improve. The image of the independent frontier individual is only part of the story. Cooperation often determined whether people succeeded. Historians still debate whether the greatest challenge of frontier travel was the physical environment itself or the psychological burden of uncertainty. Was the difficult part the mud, the distance, and the weather? Or was it the constant feeling that nature could interrupt your plans at any moment? Perhaps it was both. The rain creates a strange kind of silence without regular traffic. The roads become empty. The usual sounds of wagons and horses disappear. The town feels separated from the wider world. People begin measuring time differently. Instead of counting miles travelled, they count days waiting. You return toward the settlement as afternoon fades. The road is crowded near the general store because people have gathered after failed travel attempts. Someone laughs about losing a boot in the mud. Someone tells a story about a wagon that needed 3 people and 2 animals to pull free. These stories become part of local memory. Years later, people may not remember every ordinary day. They may not remember what they ate on a particular Tuesday or what chores they completed one morning. But they remember the unusual seasons. They remember the rain that seemed endless. They remember the road that disappeared. These memories become part of frontier identity. Survival is not always about dramatic moments. Sometimes it's simply the ability to wake up, look outside, and continue. As evening settles over the settlement, lanterns appear one by one. The road remains muddy. The rain continues falling. Somewhere beyond the hills, another traveller is still trying to reach a destination, but within the small community. People have learned the rhythm of the storm. They know how to wait. They know how to help. They know how to keep moving. Even when movement becomes difficult, the trail may be broken, but the connection between people remains. And tomorrow, when another wagon approaches through the rain, someone will step outside, offer assistance, and welcome another traveller into the slow, uncertain world of the frontier. The rain has changed the colour of the land. The bright fields that once stretched beneath open skies are now shades of deep green, dark brown, and silver grey. You stand at the edge of a farm and watch drops of water slide from the brim of your hat. The fields are quiet, but they are not peaceful in the way people often imagine. Beneath that calm surface is a farmer's constant worry. The crops are alive, but too much water can become its own problem. You walk between rows of plants with careful steps, feeling the soft ground beneath your boots. Every farmer on the frontier understands that nature is never simply generous or cruel. It gives and takes. Rain can rescue a dry field, fill a stream, and help seeds grow. Yet when the clouds refuse to leave, the same rain can threaten everything a family depends on. The farmer beside you bends down, examining the plants closely. There is no dramatic speech, no moment of panic, just careful observation. A farmer's knowledge comes from watching small changes: the colour of leaves, the condition of soil, the behaviour of animals, the smell of the air before another storm arrives. This is the quiet science of survival. A well-known historical reality is that many settlers moved westward, hoping to establish farms because fertile land and agricultural opportunities attracted thousands of families during the 19th century. Farming on the frontier required patience, experimentation, and adaptation because conditions varied greatly from one region to another. You notice that every tool has a purpose. The plough stands near the barn, waiting for better conditions. Wooden fences become barriers against wandering animals. Storage buildings protect whatever supplies can be saved from moisture. Nothing is decorative. Everything exists because someone needs it. During weeks of rain, the farm changes its routine. Some tasks must wait. Others become more urgent. A farmer may not be able to prepare new ground, but animals still require feeding. Equipment still needs protection. Roofs still need checking. Water channels may need clearing. The work does not disappear, it simply changes shape. Inside the barn. The atmosphere is different from the open fields. The sound of rain on the wooden roof creates a steady background rhythm. Horses shift their weight. Cows move slowly in their spaces. The smell of hay mixes with wet wood and damp earth. For animals, too much rain creates challenges. Mud can make movement difficult. Wet conditions can affect grazing areas. Farmers must think ahead because livestock represents security. A healthy animal is not only a source of food or labour, it is part of a family's future. You watch someone carrying fresh bedding into the shelter, replacing material that has become too wet. It is a simple task. But during a long rainy season, simple tasks repeated every day become the foundation of survival. There is a strange little detail from frontier farming that reveals how closely people observe their environment. Some farmers believed certain natural signs could help predict future weather patterns, such as the appearance of specific clouds, the activity of insects, or unusual animal behavior. These observations were not always scientifically accurate, but they represented generations of people trying to understand a world that could not be controlled. The rain continues, and conversations among farmers become filled with questions. Will the fields recover? Will the harvest arrive on time? Will the roads improve before supplies run low? These concerns are not spoken loudly. They exist in quiet moments. A person looking across a field, a hand resting on a fence, a pause before opening a storage room. The frontier often required emotional strength as much as physical strength. You may imagine farmers as people who fought against nature every day, but the reality is more complicated. Successful farmers learned to work with the environment rather than simply oppose it. They chose planting times carefully. They studied the land. They adapted their methods when conditions changed. Some families discovered that a season of heavy rain could even bring unexpected advantages. Water sources improved. Certain plants grew well. Pastures could recover after dry periods. The same storm that caused problems in one area might create opportunities somewhere else. Researchers who study historical climate records continue to examine how settlers experienced unusual weather patterns. Experts have different interpretations about how much individual storms influenced migration decisions and settlement patterns. Some suggest weather events were temporary difficulties, while others believe repeated environmental challenges shaped where communities survived and expanded. You look across the farm again as evening approaches. The rain has softened into a gentle mist. The fields shine under the fading light. For a brief moment, the farmer allows himself to imagine better days ahead. Perhaps tomorrow will be clearer, perhaps the road will begin drying, perhaps the sun will finally return, but there is still work to do tonight. A final check of the animals, a final look at the supplies, a final walk around the property before darkness arrives. The farmhouse glows warmly in the distance. Inside, a meal is waiting. The family gathers, and conversation slowly moves away from worries about weather. They talk about ordinary things, a child's small discovery, a neighbour's funny mistake, a story from years before. Even during difficult seasons. Life is not only about surviving, it is also about living. The rain outside becomes softer. The farm settles into the night. The fields rest beneath the clouds, holding the hope that tomorrow's weather might bring a different story. And as you sit inside the farmhouse, listening to the storm fade and return in gentle waves, you realize something important. The frontier was not built by people who controlled nature. It was built by people who learned how to continue when nature changed the rules. The rain has now become part of the town's daily heartbeat. When you first arrived, people still talked about when the clouds would clear. They looked toward the horizon with hopeful expressions, expecting the storm to pass any moment. But after enough days of grey skies and dripping rooftops, the question changes. People no longer ask when the rain will end. They ask how to live with it. You walk down the muddy main street of the settlement, where the usual movement of frontier life has slowed. The road that once carried wagons, riders, and merchants is now a narrow path between puddles. Wooden sidewalks have become precious pieces of dry ground. Every person who steps outside chooses their route carefully, searching for the firmest places to walk. The town has not disappeared. It has simply become quieter. The general store remains open, though fewer customers arrive inside. The shelves hold everyday necessities that suddenly feel more important than ever. Flour, candles, tools, fabric, and preserved foods are carefully counted. The shopkeeper knows that supplies cannot be replaced quickly when roads are damaged. A customer enters, shaking rain from a coat and leaving muddy footprints behind. Nobody complains. Everyone understands. The storm has brought the same inconvenience to every doorstep. You hear conversations floating through the room. Someone mentions a wagon delayed on the Eastern Trail. Someone else wonders whether the next shipment will arrive. A farmer asks about prices. A traveller asks about the safest route. The general store becomes more than a place of business. It becomes the town's information centre. In a world before instant messages and online updates, local gathering places carried knowledge. People depended on face-to-face conversations to understand what was happening beyond their own property. A person arriving from another settlement could bring news that everyone wanted to hear. A mainstream historical fact is that many Western towns developed around important gathering places such as general stores, churches, post offices, and saloons, because these locations served practical and social purposes beyond their main function. They helped communities exchange goods, information, and relationships. You step into the saloon nearby, where the atmosphere is warmer. The sound of rain against the windows mixes with quiet conversation. This is not the wild scene often shown in movies. Most ordinary days were far less dramatic. Many frontier establishments were places where people ate, rested, exchanged stories, and escaped the weather for a while. A few people play cards. Others simply sit and talk. The storm has created something unusual: time. Without easy travel, many residents have fewer reasons to hurry. They spend longer moments with neighbours. They hear stories they might have missed. They learn details about people who usually remain distant. There is a strange comfort in being forced to slow down. Of course, not everyone enjoys it. A merchant losing business because customers cannot travel does not view the rain as a peaceful break. A worker waiting for a job opportunity does not feel relaxed. Weather affects different people in different ways. The same storm can be a quiet evening for one person and a serious concern for another. You continue toward the small church at the edge of town. The building is simple, but it represents stability. During difficult periods, gatherings like these offered people a chance to maintain familiar routines. Singing, conversation, and shared meals helped communities feel connected when the outside world seemed uncertain. The rain influences even these gatherings. Attendance may change because people do not want to cross dangerous roads. Some arrive late because the journey takes longer. Others bring extra clothing because everyone knows wet conditions are unavoidable. There is an amusing detail from frontier community life that shows how people adapted socially. During periods when weather prevented normal activities, communities often created their own forms of entertainment using whatever was available. Storytelling, music, simple games, and shared meals became important ways to pass time. People did not need elaborate technology to entertain themselves. They needed imagination and company. As evening arrives, the town's lanterns glow against the wet darkness. Reflections appear in the puddles along the street. The sound of boots on wooden boards replaces the usual noise of wagons. You notice how the storm changes people's relationship with their surroundings. A place built around movement becomes a place built around waiting. A road that normally connects people becomes a barrier. A building that usually serves one purpose becomes a shelter, meeting place, and source of comfort. Some historians studying frontier communities suggest that difficult weather periods sometimes strengthened local identity because people experienced challenges together. Others believe that hardship could also increase tension as supplies became limited and economic pressures grew. The question of whether extreme weather united communities or exposed existing disagreements remains open among scholars examining personal diaries and local records. You look around the settlement and realize that the rain has revealed something hidden. The frontier was never only about expansion and adventure. It was about ordinary people creating a life in uncertain conditions. A shopkeeper keeping shelves organized. A neighbor checking on someone's roof. A traveler sharing news from another town. A family preparing another meal while waiting for better weather. These moments rarely appear in dramatic stories, but they are the foundation of history. Night settles over the town. The streets empty. Doors close. Fires burn inside homes. The rain continues its endless conversation with the wooden buildings. Tomorrow may look the same. The clouds may remain. The roads may still be difficult. But the people of the settlement have adjusted. They know where to find information. They know where to gather. They know which neighbours can help. The storm has changed the pace of life, but it has not removed life itself. And as you listen to the rain outside your window, you begin to understand that frontier survival was not always about conquering the wilderness. Sometimes it was simply about finding a way to share a warm room while the storm waited outside. The rain continues to fall, and inside the small frontier homes scattered across the landscape, families create a new rhythm. The storm outside may seem endless, but within these wooden walls, life keeps moving through familiar routines. You wake each morning to the same sounds, the crackle of the fire, the quiet movement of people beginning their chores, the soft tapping of rain against the roof. A cabin during weeks of heavy rain becomes its own little universe. You step inside one of these homes and immediately notice how carefully every space is used. There is no wasted corner. A small table sits near the centre of the room, ready for meals, repairs, writing, and conversation. Shelves hold jars, tools, books, and household supplies. A bed rests against the wall, often shared by several family members depending on the size of the home. Privacy is limited. Comfort is created through cooperation. The idea of a peaceful family gathered around a fireplace during a storm is not completely wrong. There are genuinely warm moments, but the reality also includes crowded spaces, repeated chores, and the constant effort of keeping everyone healthy and comfortable. You watch a parent wake before sunrise to prepare the day. The fire needs attention. Food needs preparing. Clothing that became damp yesterday needs checking. Water may need collecting if supplies are low. Even though the rain has reduced outdoor activity, it has not created a holiday. Frontier families do not receive a break from survival. They simply move their survival indoors. A mainstream historical fact is that many 19th century households depended on family labour, with adults and children contributing to daily tasks necessary for survival. In many rural communities, work was not separated into strict categories the way it often is today. Household responsibilities, farming, animal care, and maintenance blended together. You notice children watching the adults closely. They learn by observing. A young child may help carry small objects, organize supplies, or assist with simple tasks. Older children often take on greater responsibilities. They learn how to care for animals, prepare food, and understand the needs of the household. Rainy weeks become lessons in patience. A child cannot simply run outside whenever they want. The yard is muddy, the roads are difficult, the weather limits adventures. Instead, children discover entertainment within the cabin. They create games, They tell stories. They listen. Perhaps a child sits near the window watching water flow along the ground, imagining tiny rivers and hidden worlds outside. Perhaps siblings compete to identify sounds in the storm. Perhaps someone discovers that an ordinary wooden object can become a toy with enough creativity. You realize something important. Boredom is not a modern problem. Humans have always needed ways to fill quiet moments. Inside the cabin, adults also find unexpected opportunities. A rainy day allows time for repairs that were postponed. Clothing can be mended, tools can be maintained, letters can be written, stories can be shared. These activities might seem small, but they help transform waiting into something meaningful. The emotional side of long rainy periods is harder to measure. Imagine knowing that your plans depend on weather you cannot control. Imagine wondering whether a relative will arrive safely. Imagine looking at the same clouds every morning. The storm creates uncertainty, and uncertainty affects people differently. Some become restless, some become reflective, some simply focus on the next task. There is a small but fascinating detail from household life in this era. Some families preserved personal memories through handwritten journals, recording ordinary events such as weather patterns, visitors, harvest conditions, and daily struggles. These simple notes, sometimes written without the intention of becoming historical records, later became valuable glimpses into everyday life. Because of these personal accounts, we can imagine moments that official records often ignore. We can see what people cooked during difficult weeks. We can understand their frustrations. We can hear their small jokes and observations. Historians still discuss how accurately these personal writings represent the wider frontier experience. A diary written by one family may reveal a great deal about their lives, but it cannot automatically represent every household. Wealth, location, occupation, and community connections all shaped how people experienced difficult weather. The rain outside grows heavier during the afternoon. The cabin becomes darker, and someone lights a lamp earlier than usual. The warm glow changes the feeling of the room. Outside is a world of cold water and grey skies. Inside is a place of familiar voices and shared warmth. Meals become especially important during these periods. Food is not only about nutrition, it is about comfort. A warm bowl placed on the table can create a sense of normal life when everything outside feels uncertain. You sit with the family as they eat. Conversation moves between practical concerns and ordinary topics. Someone talks about a neighbour. Someone remembers a past journey. Someone laughs about a mistake made during a previous storm. People continue being people. Even during difficult circumstances, they complain, they joke, they dream, they plan for better days. The rain may control the landscape, but it does not control every moment of life. As evening arrives, the family prepares for another night. Wet clothing is moved closer to the fire. Supplies are checked. The room becomes quieter. The youngest children settle down while adults continue talking softly. Outside, the frontier stretches beneath a dark sky. Inside, a small cabin glows like a lantern. You begin to see that these homes were not only built from wood and nails. They were built from routines, memories, patience, and the countless small actions of ordinary people. The storm will eventually pass. The roads will eventually dry. The fields will eventually change colour again. But before that happens, these families will continue waking each morning, lighting their fires, preparing their meals, and finding ways to live another day beneath the endless rain. The rain has transformed the frontier into a place of waiting. Roads have become difficult, rivers have grown unpredictable, and familiar journeys now require careful decisions. For travellers passing through this landscape, the storm creates a strange feeling of being caught between places. You're no longer where you started, but you have not yet reached where you hope to go. You find yourself standing beside a wagon pulled beneath a temporary shelter. The travellers around you have been here longer than planned. Their original journey may have been measured in days, but the weather has rewritten their schedule. A destination that once seemed close now feels distant. The wagon sits quietly, its wooden sides covered with drops of rain. The wheels are thick with a mud. The animals rest nearby, protected as much as possible from the wet conditions. Everyone understands that rushing forward could create more problems than waiting. This is one of the hardest lessons of frontier travel. Sometimes survival means staying still. You look at the travellers gathered nearby. There is a merchant carrying goods meant for another town, a family moving toward a new home, a person travelling to visit relatives, a worker hoping to find opportunities farther west. Each person has a different reason for being on the road. But the storm has placed everyone under the same conditions. The rain does not care about plans. It does not care about schedules, it simply falls. A mainstream historical fact is that thousands of people travelled across western routes during the 19th century for reasons including migration, trade, employment, and exploration. Their journeys often depended on weather conditions, available resources, and the reliability of transportation routes. You watch a traveller inspect the wagon carefully. The person checks the wheels, the covering, and the supplies. Preparation becomes a habit when every mile carries uncertainty. A small problem that would be easy to solve near a town can become much more serious when you are far away from help. Inside the wagon, space is limited. Belongings are packed tightly. Blankets, clothing, food, tools, and personal items all compete for room. During long delays, these objects become reminders of home and the life people left behind. The family inside may have imagined this journey differently. Perhaps they pictured open skies and new beginnings. Perhaps they expected challenges, but not endless rain. Yet now they find themselves making the best of an unexpected pause. Children look outside through small openings in the wagon cover. At first, they may feel disappointed. They wanted movement and adventure instead. They have mud and waiting, but children often adapt faster than adults. Soon they discover ways to make the situation interesting. They search for unusual stones, watch animals nearby, or create games from simple objects. The adults, however, carry heavier thoughts. A delayed journey means delayed opportunities. A merchant worries about damaged goods. A family worries about reaching their destination before supplies become limited. A traveller worries about finding shelter. These concerns remain quietly present even during moments of rest. Yet there are also moments of unexpected connection. When travellers are forced to stop together, strangers become temporary companions. Stories are exchanged around small fires. Advice is shared. Food may be offered. Someone who was alone yesterday may find friendship today. There is an interesting detail from travel culture during this period. Many travellers carried small personal items that had little practical value but great emotional meaning. A photograph, a letter, a family keepsake, or a familiar object from home could provide comfort during difficult journeys. These objects reminded people that their lives were larger than the road ahead. You sit beside the travellers in the evening and listen to their conversations. Someone talks about a town they recently passed. Another person describes a beautiful landscape they saw before the storm arrived. Someone makes a joke about the amount of mud collected on everyone's boots. Laughter becomes a way of resisting frustration. The rain continues, but the mood changes. This is something often forgotten when imagining hardship. Difficult circumstances do not erase happiness. People can experience worry and joy at the same time. A person can miss home and still enjoy a good conversation. Someone can be tired and still laugh at a funny moment. Researchers who examine frontier migration continue to explore how much travellers relied on individual determination compared with social networks. Some interpretations emphasize personal independence and courage. Other studies highlight the importance of cooperation, shared knowledge, and assistance from communities along the way. Perhaps the truth rests somewhere between these ideas. The frontier was a place where individuals made difficult choices, but they rarely survived completely alone. Morning arrives again, the rain has weakened slightly, and everyone watches the sky carefully. Is this the beginning of clearer weather, or only a short pause before another storm? No one knows. The wagon leaders discuss the route ahead. They examine the condition of the trail. They consider the animals, supplies, and distance remaining. The decision is not simple. Moving too soon could create danger. Waiting too long could create new problems. You feel the tension of that moment. The entire journey depends on a choice. Finally, preparations begin. The wagon is loaded. The animals are guided forward. Everyone takes their place. The wheels begin turning, slowly, carefully. The road is still difficult, but movement has returned. You watch the wagon disappear into the mist, leaving deep tracks behind. Another traveller will follow those tracks later. Another person will face the same mud, the same rain, and the same uncertainty. The trail remembers everyone who passed, every delay, every struggle, every moment when someone chose to continue, and as you return toward the settlement. Listening to the rain soften around you, you understand that frontier travel was never only about reaching a destination. It was about learning how to move through a world where the journey itself was often the greatest challenge. The rain has a voice. At first, you barely notice it because everything else demands your attention. The roads are difficult, the fields need watching, the animals require care, the roofs must be checked, but after enough days beneath the same grey sky, the sound of the storm becomes something familiar. It becomes the background music of frontier life. You wake before sunrise and listen. There is the gentle tapping of water against wooden shingles. There is the occasional drip from a corner where the roof has not completely defeated the weather. There is the low crackle of the fire struggling against damp wood. There are footsteps moving across the floorboards as people begin another day. The frontier during endless rain is not silent. It is filled with small sounds. You step outside the cabin and hear your boots pressing into wet earth. The mud makes a soft pulling noise with every step. Nearby, animals move slowly through the softened ground. A horse shakes water from its coat. A fence creaks under the weight of moisture. Somewhere in the distance, an axe strikes wood as someone prepares more fuel for the fire. These sounds tell a story. They reveal how people live. A mainstream historical reality is that many frontier communities depended heavily on natural materials and local resources because supply networks were limited, especially in remote areas. Maintaining homes, tools, and equipment required constant attention because weather could quickly damage the things people depended on. You look at a cabin wall darkened by rain and imagine the hands that built it. Every log placed carefully, every gap filled, every repair made after storms. A frontier home was never truly finished. It was always being maintained. The weather was always testing it. Inside the settlement, the storm changes the usual sounds of daily life. The road is quieter because fewer wagons pass. The blacksmith's hammer is heard less often because fewer travellers arrive. Conversations become easier to notice because the usual activity of the town has slowed. You begin to appreciate the sounds that remain. The scrape of a chair moving across a wooden floor. The sound of a knife preparing food. The quiet voices of family members talking after dinner. The pages of a book turning near a window. These simple noises create a sense of security. For many people living through long rainy periods, the most memorable part may not have been the inconvenience itself. It may have been the atmosphere, the feeling of being surrounded by weather, the unusual appearance of familiar places, the way a normal landscape transformed into something almost unrecognizable. You walk through the settlement during the afternoon and notice how the rain changes the appearance of everything. Wooden buildings appear darker, metal tools shine beneath droplets, smoke from chimneys mixes with mist and hangs low over rooftops. Even the smell of the frontier changes. Dry grass gives way to wet soil, dust disappears beneath moisture, the scent of horses, wood, and earth becomes stronger. The human senses become closely connected to survival because people rely on observation. Before modern forecasting technology, understanding the environment was part of everyday life. People watched the sky, felt changes in temperature, noticed patterns, and learned from experience. There is a curious little piece of frontier culture connected to weather observation. Some settlers collected personal weather notes, recording temperatures, rainfall, storms, and unusual conditions. These records were sometimes created simply for practical reasons, such as planning farming activities, but they later became valuable sources for understanding past climates and daily experiences. You sit beside someone who has kept such notes. The pages contain ordinary details: a rainy morning, a damaged fence, a delayed visitor, a successful repair, a child's birthday celebrated indoors. At first glance, these details may seem small, but history is often made from small details. The grand events of the frontier receive attention, but everyday experiences reveal how people actually lived. A person standing near a fireplace during a storm, a family listening to rain while sharing a meal, a traveller waiting beside a wagon until the road improves. These moments explain the human side of history. Experts who study historical climate patterns continue to examine how communities described unusual weather in personal records. Some researchers suggest people sometimes exaggerated extreme conditions because difficult experiences leave powerful memories. Others believe these accounts provide important evidence about environmental changes and local adaptation. The truth is probably complicated. A storm can feel endless even when it lasts only weeks. A difficult season can remain unforgettable for decades. As evening arrives, the settlement becomes quieter. Lanterns appear behind windows. The rain continues its steady rhythm. You sit inside a cabin and listen to the layers of sound surrounding you. The fire pops softly. The wind moves around the walls. Rain touches the roof. Someone nearby tells a story. The combination creates a strange kind of comfort. You might expect people to become miserable after so many days of bad weather. Sometimes they certainly do, but humans have an incredible ability to create warmth in uncomfortable situations. A small room can feel welcoming. A simple meal can feel special. A familiar voice can make a difficult night easier. The storm outside remains powerful, but inside there is calm. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine all the people who experience similar nights across the frontier. Different towns, different homes, different lives, yet the same sound above them, rain falling. The storm connects them across time, long after the clouds finally disappear. People remember the unusual seasons. They remember the strange quiet. They remember the feeling of waiting while nature controlled the schedule. And perhaps that is why these rainy periods remain fascinating. They reveal a side of frontier life that is easy to overlook. Not the moments of dramatic adventure, not the famous journeys, not the battles and legends, but the ordinary evenings when people simply listened, waited, and lived. The rain continues outside your window. The fire continues glowing, and the frontier settles into another peaceful night beneath the endless sky. The rain may slow the frontier down, but it does not remove the need for work. In fact, long periods of wet weather often create a different kind of labour. The tasks that once seemed ordinary become more complicated. Every repair takes longer. Every journey requires more planning. Every object must be protected from the constant presence of moisture. You step outside in the early morning and watch people begin their routines. The sky still covered in thick clouds. Water drips from wooden fences. The ground gives slightly beneath your feet. Yet across the settlement, movement has already begun. A person carries firewood toward a cabin. Another checks a damaged wagon. Someone walks toward the barn to care for animals. The frontier does not pause completely, it adapts. You enter a small workshop where a craftsman is repairing tools damaged by the weather. The room smells of metal, oil, and damp wood. A lantern hangs overhead, creating a warm circle of light in the otherwise gloomy morning. The craftsman works carefully, because tools are valuable. A broken handle, a damaged blade, or a loose wheel is not simply an inconvenience. It affects a person's ability to work, travel, and provide for a household. In a modern world, replacing something can be as simple as placing an order and waiting for delivery. On the frontier, repair was often the first solution. People depended on skill, patience, and creativity. A mainstream historical fact is that many frontier communities relied on local craftsmen such as blacksmiths, carpenters, and wheelwrights because manufactured goods were not always easily available in remote regions. These skilled workers played important roles in keeping settlements functioning. You watch the blacksmith heat metal over the fire. The rain outside creates a contrast with the intense warmth inside the workshop. The sound of a hammer striking metal mixes with the storm, creating a rhythm that feels almost musical. The work is physically demanding, but it carries importance beyond the individual task. A repaired horseshoe helps someone travel. A fixed wagon wheel helps move supplies. A restored tool helps a farmer continue working. Small repairs keep larger systems alive. Nearby, another person works on a wagon that has suffered from the muddy roads. The wheels are covered in thick layers of earth. The wooden parts have absorbed moisture. The entire vehicle requires attention before it can safely travel again. You realize that weather affects everything. Clothing becomes heavier. Wood becomes weaker. Metal requires protection. Food storage becomes more difficult. Even simple objects need extra care. Inside homes, people spend time maintaining household items. Clothing is patched because fabric wears faster when exposed to constant dampness. Blankets are aired whenever possible. Shoes are repaired repeatedly because wet conditions are hard on leather. A family does not simply own objects. They maintain relationships with those objects. A coat may have passed through several seasons. A tool may have belonged to a parent. A piece of furniture may carry memories of another home. In a world with fewer possessions, people often developed a deeper connection with what they owned. There is a fascinating little detail from frontier household habits. Some families use natural methods to help protect materials from weather damage, including oils, waxes, and other simple treatments for leather and wood. These methods were not perfect, but they reflected practical knowledge developed through experience. The rain creates another challenge. Work becomes slower. A task that might take 1 hour on a dry day may take several hours during a wet season. Moving supplies requires more effort. Carrying materials becomes harder. People must constantly adjust expectations. You follow a farmer carrying equipment across the property. The distance is not far, but the mud changes everything. Each step requires more energy. The farmer moves carefully, knowing that rushing can cause mistakes. This is the hidden labour of the rainy frontier, not the dramatic struggles, the repeated small efforts, the extra steps nobody celebrates, the work done simply because it must be done. Historians and researchers who study frontier labour continue to examine how weather influenced daily productivity. Some argue that extreme conditions created major economic disruptions, while others suggest communities developed flexible routines that allowed them to continue with fewer interruptions than we might expect. The answer often depends on location and circumstance. A large town with skilled workers and supplies may recover quickly. A small, isolated homestead may struggle much longer. You return to the settlement in the afternoon and notice that everyone seems to be repairing something. A fence, a roof, a tool, a wagon. The storm has turned maintenance into a central part of life. Yet there is something almost comforting about this routine. The people around you are not waiting helplessly for the weather to change. They are responding. They are taking control where they can. They cannot stop the rain, but they can repair the roof. They cannot dry the entire road, but they can fix the wagon. They cannot command the clouds, but they can prepare for another day. As evening arrives, the settlement begins its familiar transition. Tools are put away. Animals are checked one final time. Fires are strengthened before the night becomes colder. The rain continues. The work continues. Life continues. You sit near the workshop entrance and watch the last repairs being completed. The craftsman wipes his hands and looks outside. Tomorrow may bring more rain. The roads may remain difficult, more problems may appear, but the tools are ready. The wagons are stronger. The homes are prepared. The people have done what they can. This is the quiet strength of frontier life. It is not always found in dramatic moments of danger. Often, it appears in ordinary evenings when someone repairs a broken object and prepares to do the same thing again tomorrow. The storm tests the settlement, but the settlement answers in its own way, with patience, with skill, with work. The rain has settled over the frontier long enough that people begin noticing changes beyond muddy roads and damaged equipment. A damp environment affects the body, the home, and the daily habits of everyone living beneath those endless clouds. The storm does not arrive with a single dramatic moment. Instead, it slowly becomes part of everyday life, bringing small concerns that must be managed again and again. You wake inside the cabin and notice the difference immediately. The air feels heavier. Clothing near the fire is still slightly damp. The wooden walls hold the scent of smoke and moisture. Even the blankets seem different after so many days surrounded by rain. Comfort requires effort. Staying healthy requires attention. You watch a family begin the morning by checking their supplies and preparing the room. Fresh air is allowed inside when possible. Damp materials are moved closer to warmth. The fire is maintained carefully because a steady source of heat is one of the most important protections against uncomfortable conditions. A mainstream historical fact is that 19th century households had limited medical resources compared with modern communities. Especially in remote frontier areas, many families relied on home knowledge, local healers, travelling doctors when available, and traditional remedies because professional medical care was often difficult to reach during weeks of rain. Isolation becomes a serious concern. A person feeling unwell cannot simply schedule an appointment and travel a short distance. Roads may be damaged. A doctor may be several hours or even days away. This reality makes prevention and household care extremely important. You notice how carefully people observe one another. Is someone unusually tired? Is someone struggling with a cough? Does a child seem less energetic than usual? Small changes matter because people depend on each other. Inside another cabin, you find a collection of jars, dried plants, and household supplies. These items represent generations of practical knowledge. People used what they had available, creating treatments based on experience, tradition, and sometimes beliefs that modern science would question. A person may prepare a warm drink for someone feeling unwell. Another may recommend rest near the fire. Someone else may share advice passed down from parents or grandparents. Not every remedy worked. Not every idea was accurate. But these practices reveal something important about human behaviour. People have always searched for ways to care for one another. There is an unusual detail from historical medicine that shows how creative people could become when resources were limited. Across different cultures and time periods, people experimented with countless household treatments, including some strange mixtures and methods that sound surprising today. Frontier communities were no exception, often combining practical observations with traditional beliefs about health. You might smile at some of these old practices, but remember the context. People were working with the knowledge available to them. A person living far from a major city did not have access to modern hospitals, laboratories, or advanced medicine. They relied on experience, family knowledge, and whatever resources surrounded them. The rainy season also affects emotional health. Being indoors for long periods changes the atmosphere of a household. People spend more time together, conversations increase, personal disagreements may become harder to ignore. At the same time, companionship becomes more valuable. A storm can make a home feel crowded. It can also make a home feel connected. You sit beside a family during the evening and notice this balance. Someone laughs at a small joke. Someone complains about the weather. Someone quietly repairs clothing while listening to the conversation. Life is not perfect. It is simply continuing. The children also experience the effects of the long rainy period. They may spend more time indoors, which means adults need patience and creativity. Learning does not stop completely. Children absorb knowledge from daily activities. They learn measurements while cooking, responsibility while helping with chores, and observation while watching the natural world. The storm becomes an unexpected teacher. Researchers examining historical communities continue to explore how isolated populations managed health during periods of environmental difficulty. Some emphasize the importance of traditional knowledge and community support. Others point out the limitations of relying on local remedies without access to advanced medical care. The reality contains both sides. People were resourceful, but they also face challenges that modern societies often avoid. You step outside again as evening arrives. The rain has softened, but the ground remains wet. The settlement looks peaceful beneath the fading light. Smoke rises from chimneys. Windows glow warmly. Inside each home, people are following familiar routines, preparing food, checking supplies, caring for family members, planning for tomorrow. The storm may create uncertainty, but routine creates stability. This is one of the most powerful parts of ordinary frontier life. People often imagine survival as a series of dramatic choices, but much of it comes from repeated small actions: washing, repairing, preparing, resting, caring, day after day, week after week. The rain outside reminds everyone that nature is still in control, yet inside the homes, people create their own sense of order. A warm room, a shared meal, a familiar voice, a small moment of comfort. These things become especially meaningful when the outside world feels unpredictable. As night settles over the frontier, you listen to the rain once again. The sound is familiar now. It no longer feels like a strange visitor. It feels like a companion that has stayed longer than expected. You think about all the people who lived through similar seasons, the farmers protecting their homes, the travellers waiting on trails, the families gathering around fires, the workers repairing tools. They all face the same question: how do you continue when conditions are difficult? The answer was rarely found in one great action. It was found in thousands of small choices: a repaired roof, a shared meal, a helping hand, a moment of patience. The rain continues through the darkness, but the cabins remain warm and the communities remain connected. Tomorrow will bring another day, and another chance to continue. The longer the rain remains, the more it begins to shape the imagination of the people living beneath it. A storm is not only something you experience with your hands and feet, it becomes something you talk about, something you remember, and sometimes something you try to explain through stories. You sit near a warm fireplace in a frontier cabin while rain continues outside. The flames move gently, casting soft light across wooden walls. Someone begins telling a story about another storm from years before. Another person adds a detail. Soon, A simple conversation becomes a collection of memories, warnings, and beliefs. This is how frontier stories grow, not always from famous events, often from ordinary nights like this. People living in isolated communities spent a great deal of time observing the natural world. Weather affected nearly every part of life, from farming and travel to food supplies and safety. When something unusual happened, people naturally searched for explanations. Why did the rain last so long? Was there a sign before the storm arrived? Would certain animals know something humans did not? These questions appeared in many societies throughout history. A mainstream historical reality is that folklore and weather beliefs were common among rural communities because people depended closely on natural patterns. Before modern forecasting systems, many people used observations of clouds, animals, plants, and seasonal changes to make predictions about upcoming conditions. You walk through the settlement and hear different opinions. One person believes the behavior of birds reveals changes in weather. Another watches the shape of clouds. Someone else trusts signs passed down from older generations. Some observations are surprisingly practical, others are more mysterious. A person might notice that certain insects appear before weather changes. Another might recognize patterns in wind direction. These observations came from years of experience living close to nature. But sometimes, people created explanations that were more imaginative than scientific, and those stories could be fascinating. There is an amusing little piece of frontier folklore involving weather predictions through unusual signs. Some people believed that animals could sense storms before humans could, and they carefully watched horses, cattle, birds, and other creatures for changes in behavior. While animals do respond to environmental changes, the idea that they could always predict specific weather events became part of local storytelling. You can almost imagine the conversation. The horses seem restless. The birds disappeared earlier than usual. Perhaps the rain will stop soon. These small discussions gave people a feeling of connection with the world around them. The storm also inspires stories about survival. Around fireplaces, people share memories of travelers who crossed difficult roads, families who endured harsh seasons, and communities that helped one another. Some stories become larger with each retelling. A person who struggled through a muddy journey may eventually become the hero of a local tale. A simple act of kindness may become a story repeated for generations. This is how communities create identity, through shared memories, through stories, through the way they explain difficult experiences. You listen as an older resident describes the storm as if it were almost a living thing. The rain is given personality. The clouds become a stubborn visitor. The wind becomes a messenger carrying news from distant places. These descriptions may not be scientific, but they reveal how people emotionally experience the environment. Nature was not separate from daily life. It was a constant presence. Scholars who examine historical accounts of weather and folklore continue to explore how much these stories reflected actual observations and how much they represented human attempts to create meaning during uncertain times. Some researchers view folklore as valuable evidence of cultural beliefs, while others focus on separating practical knowledge from symbolic storytelling. The truth may include both. A story can be imaginative and still reveal something real about the people who created it. You return to the cabin as evening deepens. The conversation continues. Someone tells a humorous story about a failed attempt to avoid the mud. Another person describes a neighbor who tried to predict the weather and was completely wrong. Everyone laughs, even during difficult seasons. People find ways to make hardship lighter. Humor becomes another form of survival. A joke cannot dry the roads. A story cannot repair a roof, but laughter can make a long night easier. This is something that appears repeatedly throughout human history. When faced with uncertainty, people create moments of comfort. They sing, they tell stories, they share memories, they find small pieces of joy. The frontier was no different. The rain outside may feel endless, But inside the cabin, imagination creates another world. A child listens carefully as adults tell stories. Years later, that child may remember the sound of the storm, the warmth of the fire, and the voices surrounding them. The details of the exact weather may fade, but the feeling remains. Memory often works this way. We remember atmosphere. We remember emotion. We remember the moments that made ordinary days feel different. You look outside through the window. The settlement is dark except for the warm glow of lanterns. The rain falls steadily, covering the landscape in a silver curtain. For some people, this storm is an inconvenience. For others, it is a story waiting to be told. And eventually, when the skies clear and the roads dry, people will not only remember the difficulties, they will remember the evenings together, the conversations, the laughter, the strange little beliefs that helped explain an unpredictable world. The storm will become part of local memory, not because it was only a time of hardship, but because it was a time when people discovered new ways to connect. You settle closer to the fire and listen one more time. The rain continues, the stories continue, and somewhere between the sound of water against the roof and the quiet voices inside the cabin, you begin to understand that frontier history was not only written through battles, discoveries, or famous names, it was also written on rainy nights like this, by ordinary people, living ordinary lives, finding extraordinary meaning in simple moments. The rain has a different meaning inside the homes of the frontier women who spend these long weeks keeping families together, while the storm changes the landscape outside. Inside the cabin there is a constant movement of hands. Food must be prepared, clothing must be repaired, children must be cared for, supplies must be organized, fires must be maintained. The work may look quiet from the outside, but quiet does not mean easy. You step into a cabin during the middle of the day and notice how much is happening. A woman sits near the window, carefully repairing a piece of clothing while listening to the sound of the rain. Nearby, a pot hangs above the fire. A child plays on the floor. Another family member checks stored supplies. The room feels small, but every corner has a purpose. During weeks of endless rain, the household becomes the center of life. The outside world may be difficult to reach, but inside these walls, someone must keep everything functioning. A widely recognized historical reality is that women in 19th century frontier communities often performed a wide range of responsibilities, including food preparation, textile work, childcare, gardening, animal care, and household management. Their labour was essential to the survival and stability of many settlements. You watch a woman prepare a meal and realise how much planning is hidden behind something simple. Food does not appear magically on the table. Ingredients must be stored, preserved, measured, and carefully used. A rainy season can make these decisions even more important because travel difficulties may limit access to fresh supplies. A jar of preserved food represents preparation from months earlier. A bag of grain represents careful planning. A bundle of dried herbs represents knowledge passed through generations. Every item tells a story. The rain also affects clothing, which becomes one of the endless household challenges. Wet conditions are hard on fabric. Clothing must be dried whenever possible, repaired when damaged, and reused as long as possible. A torn shirt or worn blanket cannot simply be replaced immediately. You see someone carefully patching a garment near the fire. The process requires patience. The stitches are small, the work is repetitive, yet this ordinary task represents something larger. Keeping life together. Many historical stories focus on explorers, soldiers, businessmen, and political leaders, but the daily survival of communities often depended on people performing countless tasks that rarely received public attention. The frontier was built not only through movement outward, It was maintained through work inside homes. You notice another important responsibility: managing emotions. Long periods of rain affect everyone. Adults become frustrated, children become restless, travellers become anxious. In these moments, someone often becomes the person who keeps the household calm. A reassuring voice, a familiar routine, a small moment of humour. These things matter. The emotional work of maintaining a home is difficult to measure because it does not leave obvious physical evidence. A repaired fence can be seen. A completed building can be photographed. But creating a sense of stability during uncertainty is much harder to record. Yet it shaped everyday life. There is a fascinating household detail from this period involving homemade entertainment and education. Many women helped preserve songs, stories, recipes, and family traditions, passing them from one generation to another. These activities were not simply hobbies, they helped maintain identity, especially for families living far from their previous communities. A recipe could carry memories of another place. A song could remind someone of relatives far away. A story could connect children with a past they never experienced. You sit near the family in the evening as someone tells a familiar tale. The children listen closely. The story may have been repeated many times, but it still has value. Traditions survive because people continue sharing them. Researchers who study gender roles in frontier history continue examining how much independence women experience compared with the limitations placed upon them during the 19th century. Some scholars emphasize the opportunities created by frontier conditions, where women often managed important responsibilities. Others highlight the social and legal restrictions that still shape their lives. The reality was complicated. A woman might have significant influence within her household while having limited power in wider society. She might make important daily decisions while still facing many restrictions. Both experiences could exist at the same time. The rain continues outside as the afternoon fades. Inside, the cabin becomes warmer. A small lamp glows beside the table. The family gathers closer because the weather has encouraged everyone to spend more time together. You notice how the storm changes relationships. People talk more, they listen more, they depend on each other more. A person who spends most days working separately on a farm may suddenly share long evenings with family members. A neighbour who rarely visits may become a regular companion because everyone is experiencing the same unusual season. The rain creates isolation from the outside world, but it can also strengthen connections within the home. As night approaches, the household prepares for rest. Clothing is moved closer to warmth. Remaining chores are completed. Children settle down. The final sounds of the day mix with the familiar rhythm of rainfall. You look around the cabin and see something that is easy to miss. This is not just a place where people hide from bad weather. It is a place where life continues, where memories are created, where knowledge is preserved, where families find comfort during uncertain times. The endless rain may dominate the landscape, but inside these homes, another story is unfolding, a story of patience, a story of care, a story of people who keep ordinary life moving even when the world outside becomes difficult. And as you listen to the rain tonight, you begin to appreciate the countless unseen efforts that allowed frontier communities to survive. Not every important moment in history happened on a battlefield or during a great journey. Some happened quietly beside a fireplace. Some happened beside a sewing basket. Some happened while someone simply prepared the next meal and made sure everyone felt safe. The rain continues to shape the world around you. But for children living on the frontier, these endless wet weeks create an experience unlike any ordinary season. Adults see the storm through the eyes of responsibility. They think about supplies, roads, crops, and repairs. Children see the same storm through curiosity. To them, the world has changed. The familiar places outside the cabin have become something new. You watch a group of children standing near a window. looking at the rain falling across the settlement. They're not only watching bad weather, they are observing a different version of their home. The path they usually walk has become a stream of mud. The fields where they might normally play are covered with water. The sounds of the town have changed. A storm that creates worry for adults can become a strange adventure for young minds. Of course, children still experience frustration. They want to run outside. They want to explore. They want freedom. Being confined indoors for days or weeks can feel endless, especially when every morning looks the same. But children are remarkably skilled at adapting. They find possibilities where adults see limitations. Inside the cabin, ordinary objects become sources of entertainment. A small piece of wood can become a toy. A scrap of fabric can become part of a game. A story from an older family member can become an imaginary journey. The frontier does not provide endless entertainment. It encourages creativity. A commonly accepted historical fact is that children in 19th century rural communities often contributed to household and farm tasks from a young age. Their responsibilities varied depending on family circumstances. But learning practical skills was an important part of growing up. You watch an older child helping with simple chores. They carry small items, assist with animals, organize supplies, or help younger siblings. These tasks may seem ordinary, but they teach valuable lessons about responsibility and cooperation. Childhood on the frontier is not completely carefree. It is a mixture of play and preparation. A rainy season often creates unexpected learning opportunities. Children spend more time near adults, listening to conversations and observing daily work. They learn how decisions are made. They learn how food is prepared. They learn why certain tools matter and why certain supplies must be protected. Education does not only happen through formal lessons, it happens through participation. You sit near a family where an adult reads aloud from a book while rain taps against the roof. The children listen carefully. Reading materials may be limited, which makes books especially valuable. A single volume can provide entertainment, knowledge, and a connection to a wider world beyond the settlement. For children living far from cities, imagination becomes a powerful companion. A story about distant places can feel almost like travel. A map can become a doorway to another world. A conversation with a traveller can become a memorable lesson. There is a charming detail from frontier childhood that reveals how children created fun from their surroundings. Young people often invented games using natural materials and simple objects available around them. Sticks, stones, homemade toys, and outdoor spaces all became part of their play. Entertainment did not require expensive equipment. It required creativity. You notice that the rain itself becomes part of childhood memories. Children watch water flow through small channels in the ground. They observe insects appearing after rainfall. They listen to the unusual sounds created by the storm, years later. They may not remember every chore they completed or every meal they ate, but they may remember the feeling of those rainy days, the smell of wet wood, the warmth of the fireplace, the sound of family voices, the strange excitement of a world temporarily transformed. Historians and childhood researchers continue to explore how young people experienced frontier life compared with modern childhood. Some argue that children had greater freedom and responsibility because they participated directly in daily life. Others point out that their experiences were shaped by difficult conditions, limited resources, and expectations placed upon them. The reality was not simply one thing. It included independence, it included hardship, it included ordinary moments of happiness. As the rainy season continues, children develop their own routines. They know which parts of the cabin are best for games. They know when adults are busy and when stories might be shared. They know how to find entertainment even when the weather refuses to cooperate. You see a child drawing shapes in the dirt near the doorway where the ground remains slightly dry. Another child creates a small collection of interesting objects discovered outside. Someone else listens closely to an older person, explaining how storms change the land. Every moment becomes part of learning. The storm teaches patience. The household teaches responsibility. The community teaches cooperation. As evening arrives, children gather near the fire while adults talk quietly nearby. The rain continues, but the cabin feels alive. There are questions being asked, stories being shared, lessons being learned. The frontier is often remembered as a place of adults making difficult decisions. But children were also part of this history. They experienced the uncertainty, the work, and the waiting. They also experienced wonder. They grew up understanding something that modern people sometimes forget. Life does not always happen according to plan. Sometimes roads disappear, sometimes journeys are delayed, sometimes the sky refuses to clear, and yet, people continue finding ways to laugh, learn, and grow. The child who watches the endless rain today may become the adult who tells stories about it years later. The storm that once felt frustrating may become a cherished memory, because childhood memories are often built from unusual moments, a strange season, a different routine, a time when the whole world seemed to slow down. You look once more toward the window. The rain is still falling, but the children inside the cabin are no longer focused only on what they cannot do. They have discovered what they can do. They can imagine, they can create, they can learn. And in that small cabin beneath the endless grey sky, a new generation of frontier memories is quietly being formed. The rain eventually begins to loosen its grip on the frontier. Not suddenly. Not with a dramatic moment when the clouds disappear and the sun returns in a burst of golden light. Instead, the change happens quietly. The drops become lighter. The streams beside the road slow down. The ground begins to hold itself together again. You step outside one morning and notice something different. The air feels lighter, the horizon looks wider. For the first time in many days, people begin looking ahead instead of only managing the present. But the end of the storm does not mean the work is finished. In many ways, the hardest part is only beginning. You walk through the settlement and see the evidence left behind by weeks of rain. The streets are uneven. Wooden paths need repairs. Fences lean in places where the ground softened beneath them. Buildings show signs of moisture and constant exposure. The storm has passed. The cleanup begins. A frontier community does not simply return to normal, it rebuilds its normal. You watch neighbours moving through town, checking what needs attention. Someone repairs a damaged roof. Someone clears a blocked drainage path. Someone helps strengthen a fence that could not withstand the wet conditions. No single person can restore everything alone. The recovery depends on many small efforts working together. A well-established historical understanding is that frontier communities often relied on cooperation because isolation made individual survival difficult. Neighbours exchanged labour, shared tools, and assisted each other with large tasks that would have been overwhelming for one household. You see this cooperation everywhere. A person with carpentry skills helps repair another family's home. A farmer lends equipment. A traveller shares information about conditions beyond the settlement. A merchant reorganises supplies after delays caused by damaged roads. The storm created problems. The community creates solutions. You follow a group repairing a section of the road leading into town. It is not a simple task. The ground must be assessed. Damaged areas must be improved. Travel routes must be made usable again. Everyone understands the importance of this work. A road is not just dirt and stones. It is connection. It allows food to arrive. It allows messages to travel. It allows people to visit each other. When a road fails, the community feels separated. When a road returns, the community begins breathing again. There is an interesting detail from historical settlements that shows how people marked periods of hardship. Communities often remembered major weather events through stories, personal notes, and local conversations rather than official records. A flood, storm, or unusually difficult season could become part of local identity, remembered by future generations as a shared experience. You can imagine years later, someone sitting in this same town and saying, "Do you remember the Great Rains?" The younger generation may have heard the story many times. They know the details. They know who helped whom. They know which buildings survived. They know which families showed kindness. Difficult moments often become the stories that hold communities together. As the days become drier, trade slowly returns, wagons appear on the roads again, travellers arrive with news from other places, the general store becomes busy. Conversations that were once about delays and damaged paths begin shifting toward future plans. The town starts moving again. But something has changed. People have learned new things about each other. They know who can be trusted. They know who offers help without being asked. They know which skills matter during difficult times. The storm has revealed the hidden strength of the settlement. Researchers studying historical disasters and recovery patterns continue examining how communities responded after environmental challenges. Some emphasize the importance of available resources and economic conditions. Others focus on social relationships, arguing that cooperation and shared trust often determined how quickly communities recovered. Recovery is never only about rebuilding objects, it is about rebuilding confidence. You walk toward a farm outside town and see another stage of recovery taking place. Fields that were covered with water are being inspected. Farmers check the condition of plants and soil. Some areas may recover quickly, others may require more time. The farmer does not know exactly what the future will bring. But there is movement again, there is possibility. The same land that looked damaged days earlier now carries signs of renewal. This is one of the most remarkable patterns of life on the frontier. People experience setbacks repeatedly, yet they continued investing effort into the future. They planted crops after difficult seasons. They rebuilt homes after storms. They repaired roads after damage. They believed tomorrow was worth preparing for. As evening arrives, the settlement gathers again. This time, the mood is different. The conversations are not only about problems, they are about progress. Someone mentions that the road is improving. Someone talks about planting again. Someone laughs about the amount of mud everyone carried into their homes. The storm has become a memory, even though traces remain. You sit near the same fireplace where people once waited anxiously for the weather to change. Now the conversation feels lighter. The rain is no longer controlling every decision. The community has moved beyond survival mode. It has begun rebuilding its future. You think back to the first days of the storm, the endless clouds, the difficult roads, the quiet cabins, the uncertainty. At the time, those moments may have felt overwhelming, but now they have become part of the settlement story, not a story about defeat, a story about adaptation. Because frontier life was never about avoiding every challenge. That was impossible. It was about responding when challenges arrived. The rain tested the town, the recovery revealed its character, and as the sun finally begins to appear through the thinning clouds, you realize that the most important part of survival was never the absence of hardship. It was the ability to begin again. The storm has faded into memory. But as you walk once again through the frontier settlement, you begin to see the rain differently. It is no longer only a period of difficulty. It has become a window into the deeper meaning of survival. The muddy roads have started to dry. The fields are beginning to recover. The sounds of ordinary life have returned. A wagon rolls through town. A blacksmith works near his fire. Children move more freely outside. Conversations stretch beyond weather reports and worries about supplies. Yet the people around you carry something from those long rainy weeks. They are changed, not because the storm destroyed them, because the storm revealed them. You pause beside the same path that once seemed impossible to cross. The deep tracks left by wagons have softened. Grass begins appearing along the edges. Nature is slowly covering the evidence of hardship. This is how many difficult periods disappear from the landscape. The earth heals, but the memories remain. You think about the people you have followed through this journey. The farmer watching uncertain fields, the traveller waiting beside the damaged road, the family gathered inside a small cabin, the worker repairing tools, the child discovering games during endless rain. None of these people became famous. Most names disappeared from historical records, yet their experiences represent something important: everyday life. A recognized fact about American frontier history is that many settlers faced constant uncertainty as they built communities in unfamiliar environments. Weather, distance, limited resources, and changing economic conditions all shaped how people lived and made decisions. The popular image of the frontier often focuses on courage and independence. Those qualities certainly existed, but independence did not mean living completely alone. The people who succeeded were often those who understood when to cooperate, when to adapt, and when to ask for help. You look around the settlement and notice signs of this balance. A person repairs their own home but accepts assistance when a task becomes too difficult. A farmer manages their own land but depends on markets and neighbours. A traveller continues their journey but relies on information from others. Survival is personal, but it is rarely individual. The endless rain reveals this truth clearly. During dry seasons, people may feel separated by distance. Farms sit apart. Travellers move through quickly. Daily routines keep everyone focused on their own responsibilities. But when the roads disappear and the weather changes the rules, connections become visible. The neighbour becomes important. The craftsman becomes important. The person with knowledge becomes important. The person willing to help becomes important. There is a small but meaningful detail from frontier communities that shows this spirit of connection. Many settlements developed informal networks of assistance, where people exchanged labour, shared equipment, or helped during difficult moments without expecting immediate payment. These relationships were not always recorded in official documents, but they form the foundation of community life. You can imagine a farmer remembering who helped repair a barn, a family remembering who brought supplies during a difficult week, a traveller remembering the stranger who offered shelter. These moments become part of personal history. Researchers studying historical resilience continue exploring how ordinary people responded to repeated challenges. Some focus on practical skills such as farming techniques, construction methods, and resource management. Others examine emotional resilience, including patience, hope, and social relationships. The question is not simply how people survived. It is how they continued creating meaningful lives while facing uncertainty. The frontier was not a place where hardship existed separately from happiness. Both existed together. A family could struggle with weather and still celebrate a birthday. A farmer could worry about crops and still enjoy a beautiful morning. A traveller could face difficult roads and still discover friendship along the way. Human life has always contained contradictions. The storm teaches this lesson quietly. You walk toward the edge of town where the landscape opens into wide fields. The sky's clearer now. Sunlight touches the ground that was once covered by rain. It feels almost strange. After so many days of grey skies, brightness seems unfamiliar. People often remember difficult times because they change how ordinary moments feel afterward. A warm room feels warmer, a dry road feels more valuable, a simple journey feels easier. The absence of hardship becomes something to appreciate. You notice that the people of the frontier do not celebrate because they defeated nature. They celebrate because they learned to live alongside it. The storm was never an enemy with a final victory. It was a reminder that humans exist within a larger world. Weather shapes decisions, the land shapes opportunities, the environment influences history, and people respond. As evening settles, you return to the settlement. The same buildings stand beneath a different sky. The same people continue their routines. But now there is a quiet confidence among them. They know they can face difficult seasons. They know problems will return. Another storm will come someday. Another road will become difficult. Another challenge will appear. But experience has changed them. They have learned patience. They have learned preparation. They have learned the value of community. The Endless Rain was not only a story about weather. It was a story about time, about waiting, about adapting, about discovering what truly matters when ordinary routines are interrupted. You sit near the edge of town as night approaches. The sounds are familiar again. Voices from homes, animals settling down, tools being stored away. The frontier continues, not because everything is easy, because people continue. And perhaps that is the most important lesson hidden within those weeks of endless rain. Survival is not always about dramatic moments. Sometimes it is simply waking up after a difficult day and choosing to begin again. The rain has become a memory now, but memories have their own weather. Some remain bright and clear, like a sunny afternoon after a long storm. Others stay grey and quiet, returning unexpectedly when someone tells a familiar story or when an old object brings the past back to life. You walk once again through the frontier settlement, but this time you are searching for what remains. Not the damaged roads, not the broken fences, not the marks left behind by flooding. You are looking for the human traces, the stories hidden in ordinary places, a cabin wall, a repaired wagon, a handwritten note, a tool that was used every day. History often survives through things that seem insignificant at first glance. The objects people touched, the places where they worked, and the memories they shared can reveal more about daily life than grand descriptions of famous events. You step inside an older home where the fireplace still stands. The room feels familiar. You can almost imagine the conversations that happened here during those endless rainy weeks. Someone sitting near the fire, someone repairing clothing, someone telling stories while children listened. The storm may be gone, but the atmosphere remains. A well-known historical reality is that much of what historians know about everyday life comes from personal records such as diaries, letters, household notes, and local accounts. These sources often reveal details that official documents overlook, including emotions, routines, and ordinary struggles. You imagine opening a diary from the rainy season. The entries are not dramatic. They do not describe every moment as an important historical event. Instead, they mention simple things. Rain continued. The road remained difficult. A neighbour visited. A repair was completed. A meal was prepared. These small sentences become valuable because they show how people experience time. History is not only made from major events, it is also made from ordinary days. You walk past a storage room and notice old supplies carefully arranged, a container that once held food, a tool that helped repair equipment, a piece of fabric saved because it still had use. These objects tell quiet stories about resourcefulness. People living on the frontier often needed to think carefully about what they owned. Waste was expensive, replacement was difficult, objects were repaired, reused, and transformed. A broken item was not automatically useless. It was often a problem waiting for a solution. There is an interesting detail from historical preservation that shows how valuable ordinary objects can become. Many items saved by families for personal reasons later helped researchers understand everyday experiences. A simple recipe book, a collection of letters, or a household item can reveal information about food, work, relationships, and routines. The things people considered normal at the time can become fascinating windows into the past. You continue through the settlement and think about how differently people remember the same storm. For one person, the endless rain may represent a difficult economic period. For another, it may represent a time when neighbours became closer. For a child, It may become a strange and unforgettable part of growing up. Memory is personal. The same event can create different stories. Scholars who examine historical memory continue exploring how communities decide which experiences become part of their shared identity. Some focus on written records and physical evidence. Others study oral traditions, family stories, and local legends that survive across generations. Not every story can be proven in exact detail, but stories themselves reveal what people valued. You sit beside an older resident who remembers the storm through personal experience. The person does not begin with dates or measurements. Instead, they describe feelings, the sound of rain, the smell of wet wood, the warmth of the cabin, the kindness of neighbours, the frustration of waiting, the relief when the roads opened again. These details create a picture that numbers alone cannot provide. You realize that understanding history requires more than knowing what happened. It requires imagining how it felt. The frontier was not experienced as a chapter in a textbook. It was experienced one morning at a time, one meal at a time, one difficult decision at a time, as the evening light fades. You look across the landscape where people once struggled through mud and uncertainty. The fields appear peaceful now. The roads are open. The settlement has grown beyond those difficult weeks, but somewhere beneath the surface, the memory remains. A future generation may walk these same paths without realizing what happened here. They may see only ordinary land. They may see only old buildings. They may not hear the rain that once covered this place. Yet history is often hidden beneath ordinary appearances. Every quiet road has stories. Every old home has memories. Every community carries experiences that shape the people who live there. The endless rain in the Old West was not the largest event in history. It did not change nations or appear in every major record. But for the people who lived through it, it mattered. It influenced decisions. It tested patience. It created moments of connection. It became part of their lives. You stand beneath the evening sky and imagine all the voices that once filled this settlement. The conversations, the laughter, the worries, the hopes, the storm has disappeared. The people have moved on, but their experiences remain. And perhaps that is why ordinary history matters so much. Because most people throughout history were not famous. They were farmers, parents, workers, travellers, and children. They faced ordinary challenges. They found ordinary solutions. They lived ordinary lives that were not ordinary to them. The rain taught them lessons about preparation, cooperation, and endurance. And now, long after the clouds have cleared, those lessons continue travelling through time. You take one final look across the frontier landscape. The ground is dry. The roads are open. The sky is calm. But somewhere in the quiet distance, you can still imagine the sound of rain falling on wooden roofs, a reminder of a season when people waited, a reminder of a season when people adapted, a reminder of a season when everyday life revealed its deepest strength. The frontier is quiet tonight. You find yourself walking once more along the old path that carried wagons, riders, farmers, and travellers through a world shaped by endless skies. The rain that once seemed impossible to escape has become a distant memory. The ground beneath your feet is firm again. The air is calmer. The sounds of daily life have returned. But as you walk, you can still remember the storm. You remember the sound of rain tapping against wooden roofs. You remember the smell of damp earth after long days of water. You remember the warmth of small fires inside crowded cabins. You remember the patience of people waiting for roads to reopen. The story of endless rain in the Old West is not only about weather, it's about how ordinary people experienced time, uncertainty, and change. You look across the landscape and imagine all the lives that passed through this place. A farmer checking his fields, a traveller searching for a safe route, a family gathering inside a cabin, a worker repairing a tool that needed to last another season. These moments may seem small, but small moments create the foundation of history. The frontier was never simply a place of dramatic adventures and famous names. It was a place where thousands of people woke each morning and handled the responsibilities of everyday life. They prepared meals, they repaired homes, they cared for animals, they raised children, they built communities, and sometimes they waited for the rain to stop. A broadly accepted historical fact is that the development of the American West depended on the ability of settlers and communities to adapt to challenging environments, geography, climate, available resources, and social connections all influenced where people settled and how they survived. The endless rain reveals this adaptation clearly. People did not control the weather. They learned how to respond. They adjusted their routines, they changed their plans, they helped one another. They found comfort where they could. You pass the old settlement buildings again. The general store stands quietly. The road that once disappeared beneath mud now carries regular traffic. The cabins that once held families waiting through storms now represent something more than shelter. They represent memory. Inside those homes, people experienced moments that would never appear in grand histories. A parent calming a child during a thunderstorm, a neighbour sharing supplies, a family laughing at a small inconvenience, a traveller receiving kindness from strangers. These were not famous events, they were human events. There is a simple truth hidden in these stories. History is not only shaped by extraordinary individuals, it is shaped by ordinary people making countless decisions every day. Someone choosing to help, someone choosing to continue, someone choosing to prepare for tomorrow. The rain tested those choices, and the people responded. You think back to the farmers who watched their fields carefully. They understood that nature could bring both opportunity and difficulty. They did not see the land as something completely separate from themselves. They lived within its rhythms. You remember the travellers who waited beside damaged roads. They learned that reaching a destination sometimes required patience rather than speed. You remember the families inside small cabins. They created warmth and connection even when the outside world felt uncertain. Each story carries the same message. Survival is built slowly. Researchers who study environmental history continue examining how communities responded to unusual weather patterns in the past. Some focus on climate conditions and physical evidence. Others examine personal accounts to understand how people emotionally experience these events together. These perspectives reveal that weather was never just a background detail. It shaped human decisions. It influenced daily life. It became part of personal memory. You stand beneath the evening sky and notice how peaceful everything feels now. The same landscape that once appeared difficult and overwhelming has become calm again. The storm changed nothing about the importance of simple things: a dry place to sleep, a warm meal, a familiar voice, a helping hand. These things mattered during the rain, and they still matter today. Perhaps that is why stories of ordinary frontier life remain fascinating. They remind you that people from the past were not distant figures living in a completely different world. They experienced emotions you recognize. They worried about the future. They cared for the people around them. They hoped for better days. The details of their lives may seem far away, but the feelings are familiar. Everyone understands waiting, everyone understands uncertainty, everyone understands the comfort of a safe place when the world outside feels difficult. The rain eventually ended, the roads eventually dried, the fields eventually recovered, the communities continued, and now, as you walk away from the old settlement, the frontier becomes quieter. The last light fades across the landscape. The wind moves gently through the grass. The sky stretches endlessly above you. The storm is no longer a threat. It is a memory, a story carried forward. A reminder that even during the longest seasons of difficulty, people find ways to continue. They find warmth. They find friendship. They find hope. And tonight, As you imagine the old frontier beneath a peaceful sky, you can let the sounds of that world slowly fade. The distant road becomes quiet. The wooden cabins rest. The fields breathe softly. The people who lived through those rainy weeks have long since moved on, but their stories remain, carried gently through time. So as the night grows deeper, remember the lessons hidden within those endless storms. Not every struggle is dramatic. Not every victory is loud. Sometimes courage looks like preparing another meal. Sometimes strength looks like repairing one more tool. Sometimes resilience is simply waking up and beginning again. The frontier survived because people continued. And perhaps that is the most comforting thought of all. No matter how long the rain lasts, clearer skies eventually arrive. No matter how difficult the road becomes, someone will always find a way forward. The old trail disappears into the distance now. The sky above you is peaceful. The world grows quiet. And the story of the endless rain in the Old West finally comes to rest. The rain has faded now. The old frontier trail rests beneath a quiet sky. And you can imagine the gentle movement of grass where wagons once passed. The cabins remain still. The lanterns have grown dim. The voices of families, travellers, and neighbours have become distant echoes carried softly through time. You walk slowly across this peaceful landscape, remembering the people who lived through those long rainy weeks. They did not know exactly when the clouds would disappear. They did not know how quickly roads would recover or how the season would change. But they knew how to continue. They found warmth beside small fires. They found comfort in familiar voices. They found strength in ordinary routines. And now, as the night settles around you, those memories become softer. The sound of rain is no longer a reminder of difficulty. It becomes a gentle rhythm from another time, a quiet song of patience and endurance. You imagine the wooden cabins glowing warmly in the darkness. You imagine families resting after another day of work. You imagine the frontier becoming peaceful again beneath a sky full of stars. The storm has passed, the roads are open, the fields are calm, the people have moved forward. And perhaps that is the most beautiful lesson hidden in these forgotten seasons of history. Life does not need to be perfect to be meaningful, even during uncertain days. People create moments of kindness, connection, and hope. So let your thoughts drift now. Let the old trails grow quiet. Let the sound of distant rain become softer and softer. The frontier sleeps beneath the night sky, the cabins rest, the fields breathe, and somewhere beyond the horizon, a new morning is waiting. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. Rest peacefully, and allow yourself to drift into a calm and gentle sleep. End of script.